Hey everybody, welcome to another Live at the Waterhole with WildEarth and Africam. Delighted that you can join us today. My name is Ben Coley. I will be looking after you for the next 2 hours as we take our usual foray into all the different Africam locations across the country, or across the continent, I should say. We have cameras in East Africa, in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and a variety of other spots. And who knows what we're going to see today. It's been a fantastic last 4 days. Today is my 5th day and will be my last day of this month. We'll be passing you on to somebody else as of tomorrow. But it has been great to spend the last 4 or 5 days with everybody. And I would love to hear more from you as well today. So don't forget, you can communicate with us via the website. You can register and send in your questions. You can follow on the YouTube chat stream. You can use X with the hashtag WildEarth. And as always, we would love to hear from you, hear your questions, your comments, hear what you're up to, and answer anything that might be in your head at this moment. So please do send us in. We can't do this show without you. But we've started out at Tembe Elephant Park on the eastern side of South Africa in KZN. And we've got a little antelope of some description. Can't actually quite see what name it, but it looks like he was chasing a bird around. Looks about the size of a steenbok, but no, it's not a steenbok. It's a bushbuck, I think, possibly. Or maybe a young Inyala. Have to get a little bit closer to see on my screen. But nice to see something a bit different. There's little white tails as they're bounding through the grasses, that classic follow me sign, as they're called, that little visual communication as animals are fleeing away, often from a predator. It gives the predator something obvious to see, and then the animal ducks into thick cover, stands motionless, remains very, very still while the predator is still looking for that white flash, and hopefully the antelope remains unseen. And there they are. I'm trying to see if they've got spots or stripes. Ah, that's a bushbuck. Nice, a mother bushbuck and a little one. That's not something we've seen this week. So Inyalas and bushbucks are very, very similar in colour, both that sort of beautiful tawny orange colour. But the bushbuck has those little spots that you can see on the rump there, whereas the Inyala has those vertical white stripes, similar to a kudu, but much more orange in colour and a lot smaller than a kudu. Except the male Inyala, of course, who is that sort of lovely charcoal grey colour. Whereas these are impalas. It's nice to see something a little bit different. We normally only see elephants here at Tembe Elephant Park, as the name might suggest. Nice to spend some time with some antelope. A nice ram in the background there, and some impala ewes in the foreground. This time of year we should be very much out of impala breeding season. The rut is very much over by now. That's normally sort of March and April, maybe a little bit of, or March, April, May as a rule. So the rutting season is when all the males are attempting to mate with the females. They hold their territories and hope that females wander into their territories. And when they do, they will try and take advantage of any of those mating opportunities and try and corral those females into staying within his territory. But then once all the females are pregnant, which is the majority, so the high 90% of female impalas do get pregnant, one of the many reasons that they're very successful. And once everybody's pregnant, you'll find that the social structure changes a little bit, and we end up more with sort of mixed herds. Although there is always that sort of late rut where we get those spate of late births. We've got a few messages coming through. Leopard lover, good to hear from you. Looking forward to a relaxing time at the waterholes. So are we. So are we. Mercedes Bean, nice to hear from you again. Greetings to everybody this side. Penelope Kenyon, welcoming everybody. Welcome to you too. Let's hope we have some more beautiful sightings. I'm sure we'll have plenty of elephants. Seems to be very much the theme of the week. I'd say, who knows whatever else we might get. Did get a brief glimpse of some lions a few days ago at Cat Eye Pan. That was very, very special. Joanne Mello, happy Wednesday to everybody. Happy Wednesday to you as well. Thanks everyone for sending in your messages. It is so nice to hear from you. And say the knowledge that you're coming from all over the globe makes this a very special experience for me and us as a group. So Tenby Elephant Park wouldn't be Tenby Elephant Park without an elephant having a nice drink. Such a beautiful spot this. And a little warthog having a roll around in the mud there, and a couple of woolly neck storks that we haven't seen very many of recently. It's nice to see. Okay, let's head over and have a look at what the weather holds for us today in our different locations. Yeah, it looks like our little warthog has finished his wallow. We were talking yesterday about elephants being those ecological engineers and that keystone species that could have a knock-on effect on so many other animals. We often comment on those little sort of potholes that you can see at the front there, which have been excavated by the elephants as they're digging for mud. And that creates perfect opportunities for things like the warthogs to then come and roll around in the mud and avoid the deeper water, and potentially any danger of crocodiles and the like in there. Good afternoon, Catherine. I'm glad you can also join us. Itchy warthogs. Really enjoying this nice green grass. It is nice to see that still areas of South Africa are not quite as dry. We've seen a lot of very, very dry vistas up on the western side, but still a little bit more moisture down there in KZN, close to the coast, and you can see that reflected in the colour of the grass. And warthogs being exclusive grazing animals, will be very thankful for that. Quite happily munching away on that nice, short, nutritious grass. And of course, they'll use that shovel-shaped nose of theirs to push over the grass and also eat the roots when times get a little bit tougher, where the grass is holding their nutrients. Our elephant in the background will, of course, be changing his diet over the next few months. During the summer months, when there's a plentiful supply of grass, they will normally eat 7 to 80% of grass and just subsidize that with a few leaves and twigs and cambium layers and plenty of fruit, of course, around in the summer as well, going for that more nutritious food that they can get their trunks onto. But once everything starts drying up in the winter, they will change their diets and flip it almost 180 degrees and go to 70, 80% of wooded material, so leaves, and branches and twigs, that cambium layer, just trying to get enough fuel into that massive engine to keep it ticking over during the harsher months. Evidently, you're asking with regard to my experiences in New Zealand, as if we saw any similar birds that we saw in South Africa, or that I see in South Africa. I'm sure we probably did, but I'm trying to think of what they would be off the top of my head. I know some of the coastal birds would certainly have occurred down there that you might find along the coast in South Africa as well. Things like Arctic terns, I know, have been seen down there, but I can't think off the top of my head of any species that I've managed to sort of get in both locations. Strangely, there's a lot of introduced species in New Zealand that have come from Europe. I saw a lot of birds in New Zealand that I would expect to see in England, for example, things like blackbirds and chaffinches, redpolls, lots of sort of those smaller passerines that you find everywhere because there's a lot of introduced species in New Zealand. There's a big push to try and eradicate some of those introduced species because, of course, when you introduce a new species to an ecosystem, it upsets the apple cart somewhat and makes it much more difficult for those endemic species to remain. But we did see some very, very nice endemic species there as well. I'm very happy to say that I did see a few kiwis on an area called Stewart Island, which is one of the best places you can go to see kiwis. Black stilts that I've mentioned before, which is the most endangered wading bird in the entire world. I was lucky enough to see some of those in the wild. Less than 200 birds remaining in the wild apparently at the moment, which is a horrifying thought. Things like fantails, I think the little riflemen, which were very, very cute. I think those are endemic to New Zealand. But very much not the diversity of bird life that I'm used to out there. I think in 7 or 8 months of being out there, I only amassed sort of 70, 75 birds. That was considered pretty good. Whereas, of course, in South Africa, you go into the Kruger Park in the summer and you get over 100 birds in a matter of hours. A lot of the wading birds that we find in South Africa, you do also find up in Europe because we have many Palearctic migrants that frequent both sides of the hemispheres, and you get a lot of wading birds, things like the sandpipers and that sort of group of family, ruffs and things that will also come to both hemispheres. They will migrate right the way from the northern to the southern hemispheres every single year. Amazing the amount of distance they can put under their wings. Godwits is another one. We have a lot of godwits in England that we don't often see in South Africa, but they do migrate all the way down there every year. Timeshare on these little mud wallows has changed. The warthogs made themselves scarce. Now elephants has come round for a little bit of a bath. Actually, just trying to find my New Zealand bird list to double check because that's actually a good question. I can't remember off the top of my head, and worryingly, I can't find my New Zealand bird list. But life is rather complicated at the moment because I currently have three phones on the go with information: one UK phone, one South African phone, and one New Zealand phone. I need to, at some point, accumulate everything into one place, I think. Otherwise we're going to lose all of this information. I would be devastated to lose a bird list. Obviously, ironically, my New Zealand bird list is on my South African phone, as of course you would expect. Okay, so European starlings I saw there, which you are seeing more and more of in southern Africa, particularly down in Cape Town. You see quite a few there. Kelp gulls I got. Um, oyster catcher, although I think it's slightly different species. Quickly flicking through the list. Yeah, I think that's about it, actually. But unfortunately, I never got a chance to go up to North Island, where there is other birds there. It's quite specific what was on the South Island. There's a bit of a difference, particularly in climate, between North and South Island. I hadn't realised how long New Zealand was in terms of North and South, and that leads itself to quite a few different climatic conditions in different areas, which therefore, of course, leads to some different bird life occurring in those areas. It gives me a good excuse to go back and explore North Island at some point, though. But my biggest goal is to get back to South Africa and be able to breach the 600 barrier. I've been stuck on the 580s and 590s for a couple of years now. I need to go on either a boat trip or head to some areas that I do. High on my list, obviously, from a dark sky perspective, but there's quite a few endemic species of birds found within the Karoo area that I should be able to go down and tick off quite quickly. I think I'm sitting on about 594 at the moment, so I don't need many to hit the 600 mark, and I shall raise a glass to myself when I get there. But that leaves quite a few thousand in terms of worldwide birds. So there was something I saw on social media a little while ago of a couple of guys who had just reached the 10,000 bird species mark throughout the world, and that's quite the undertaking. Massive, to excuse the pun, feather in their caps, I would think. Not many people have amassed that many bird species. Rather plucky grey heron here, coming to see what the elephant is up to. See the elephant just watching it carefully. Who are you? Surrounding my watering spot. You see the body language of that bull, just giving it a glance as he walks past. We've attracted a bit of an audience, just Billy next door also looking on, wondering what on earth is happening. Indeed, leopard lover, 10,000 birds is some serious birding dedication. I don't think many of us will ever get to that. But I did think there's sort of an amusing competition going on. This guy was very, very close, was in the high 9,900s, and then somebody else popped up to say they were also in the high 9,900s. And it seems the two of them then sort of rushed to try and get to a new area to be the first one to hit 10,000 out of the two of them. And I think it ended up being very close within one or two birds or 1 or 2 days between them as to who got there first. So it just shows there's competition everywhere, drives us to succeed. This heron's problem is it's very interesting what's happening. Elephant lover, you are in cloudy Skegness. I'm trying to think exactly where Skegness is. I know it's up in the north somewhere, but not anywhere that I have been. It doesn't surprise me to hear that it's cloudy, though. Wondering when I will be next back at Juma. Elephant lover, I don't know. Ultimately, it's not up to me, but I'm hoping that I will be back there at some point this year. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. I do hope I get the opportunity to be there, though. I miss all the characters. This elephant. I'm trying to. It's like a cat trying to get into a little tiny box. How nice is that to see? That is one relaxed elephant. Going to find it quite difficult to get up, though, I think, on that slippery substrate. Wait for him to lose control and roll over completely. That would be hilarious. Oh, he's done well. They must have better grip than we give them credit for those feet. But those cracks on the bottom of the feet um, must act a little bit like the tread on tyres and give them a little bit more traction. I suppose there's a lot of weight pushing down, but slightly concerned about those back feet there. They must be rather slippery with all that mud. You wouldn't want to suddenly slip backwards, of course, if an elephant was to have an accident like that and cause some serious damage to its leg. Ooh. um, it can often spell curtains for that animal. There's not much that a vet would be able to do for an elephant with a broken leg. Let's hope for the best that he's got some good footing. But obviously, very good spatial awareness despite that massive bulk. But speaking of Juma, I think we're going to head over to the dam cam at Juma and see if anything's come to visit the waterhole. Well, lots of things have come to visit the waterhole. A nice big herd of buffalo. Very, very cool. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened there. Sorry, obviously some technical difficulties at Juma's dam cam. So we know there are buffalo there, but in the meantime, we have rocketed across the country to the far west to Jamala to enjoy some more elephants having a drink. That was a nice little show that elephant at Tembe had put on for us. It sounds like we fixed the problem, so let's go back over and enjoy those buffaloes in the water at Juma. There we go. Nice to see some big herds. It's something we expect to see in the Sabi Sands during the winter months. We do get a lot more buffalo in the sands during the winter because of the fact that there's quite a lot of water points down here. Buffalo is very water dependent animals, need to drink twice a day generally. So they will often just go where the water is and then cut their swathe across the landscape, eating as they go. Often in the summer months, from this location in the northern Sabi Sands, they disappear further up north towards the Manileti, because there's a lot more sort of open grassy areas up there, which is what the buffalo are looking for, being exclusive grazers, bulk grazers that they are. They need an awful lot of fodder to keep them going. And yes, much more open in Manileti due to some gabbro rock type, which is a much finer grained igneous rock, which just lends itself better to open grasslands as opposed to woodland. So we've got a lot of herds that head up there, and they can also obviously drive with them their associated predators. I was asked yesterday about male lions and how much hunting that male lions do. Um, and for that period between when they leave their prides to when they are potentially big enough and strong enough to take over their own territory, that 2 or 3 year period between the ages of 3 and 5, 3 and 6, it's been various research has been done and shown that this is their major prey source. Those nomadic males, because they don't have a territory to defend, they basically just follow herds of buffalo around and make a nuisance of themselves, to be honest, looking for any old, young, sick, weak animals that they can separate from the herd. And that is pretty much their primary prey source for those first few years of adulthood. They need lots and lots of energy, lots and lots of protein. And whilst it's a risky proposition to take on a buffalo, it's a risk-reward situation. There's an awful lot of meat there if you can get away with it. Connie S, you are enjoying all the buffs. Absolutely nice to see them enjoying the pool as well. Doesn't look like the biggest herd, although they look fairly scattered. I've seen some huge herds in my time. I remember one in the western sector of the Sabi Sands that we estimated must have been over 1,000. It was just a stream of buffaloes that were just sort of filing out of the bushes, coming down to drink at a waterhole like this, and they just kept coming and coming and coming for it felt like somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. It was just a huge black blanket across the landscape. But the biggest herds I've seen was when I was working up in East Africa. I spent some time in Katavi National Park in Tanzania. And out on the floodplains there, although we could never get sort of super close to them, but you could view them from binoculars because it was nice and open. I remember seeing one herd up there that we estimated was probably closer to 2,000 heads strong. It was pretty amazing. It'll be interesting to see whether this herd of buffaloes at Juma interests the local predator population, and maybe you guys see something exciting on the afternoon safari. I had an amazing sighting up at Juma a couple of years ago of, it was the Nkuhumas that were hunting a herd of buffalo up by Buggles Hook Dam. We sat with them for a long time, and they lay in the grass as the buffalo were approaching them, and there were a couple couple of buffalo that were feeding within probably 2 meters of the lionesses, but the problem was they had their cubs with them, and their cubs were just sort of stranded on a little termite mound. And I'm amazed that the trap wasn't sprung earlier, but I think they were worried about the proximity of the cubs and the aggressive reaction of the buffalo. In the end, there was a lot of sort of chasing of things around, or the buffalo chasing the lions, really, but the lions made a hasty exit in the end. We didn't actually get to see any successful hunt being made, but amazing to watch the interaction between those two species. A war that's been raging for millennia. But as we came in, it has been a great start for today's show. Balancing elephants, some frolicking bushbuck, and now a great big herd of buff. Okay, but it seems we're going to head over to Namibia, to Ukakoyu, and see who's having a drink there. Ah, plenty more elephants. Lots of elephants. Stark contrast in the landscape as you go further west to the drier regions. As Ralph was telling us the other day, this time of year, we're going to be seeing more and more elephants as the other areas dry up and these permanent water holes become incredibly important to the animals. But wonderful to see such open areas and lots of different animals. It must be a herd of zebras being ousted in the background. The elephant turn at the waterhole. A little bit of chasing going on there. You can see the bigger bull ousting the smaller one. There just seemed to be a sort of a general air of, I don't say panic, but lots of elephants moving quite quickly. But of course, in a situation like this, you'll have multiple herds coming down. There'll be lots of interesting interactions as elephants that haven't seen each other for a while are meeting up. It could, of course, be one giant herd. But quite normal for them to come together and exchange greetings, and that will as well bring together various males with heightening levels of testosterone, which will lead to the occasional little spat like that. Connie, yes, I certainly have enjoyed my travels, but I am very much looking forward to re-immersing myself in the African bush that I love. Um, and yes, it's always nice to record your experiences. I've got bird lists for different areas of South Africa, bird lists for different countries now, a life list of all the ones that I've seen. I must actually add them all up to see where I am. Certainly not at 10,000 yet. But it's something I always enjoy doing, particularly birding. It's something you can do anywhere. And wherever you go, it's normally the first thing that I'll do is I'll buy a bird list or make sure I've got the relevant information on an app somewhere. and my binoculars are never far behind me. But I enjoy keeping lists. I like a bit of organisation, despite what many of my friends and family might think. I do well with organisation and routine. I don't have an insect list. Maybe I should start one, actually. I've got a good remembrance of all the different insects that I've seen, and I do get excited when I find something I haven't seen before, but that pretty much happens on a daily basis if you go looking. But Lovey, you're asking how my experience was the first time I saw a kill. Um, I mentioned it the other day. It was actually lions taking out a warthog, and it was during my sort of work experience period of my training back in 2007. Um, of course, I was very excited seeing what was happening, as are most guests, and I think as most guests when it did happen, the stark reality and the harshness of nature did hit home. I think it was one of the worst ones that you can see first off for a warthog because it's got such a sort of a chunky neck and it's so strong. The lions can't clamp around its neck and just cut off the oxygen supply and then feed at will. It's sorry to be so graphic, but they generally pin it down and rip it apart. But this poor thing is alive, and the noise that it made was pretty horrific. It's something that I'll never forget. That squealing. Um, you have to remind yourself that if the lions didn't get to feed, they would also go hungry. So it's an immense sacrifice on behalf of the warthog, but it was for a good cause in terms of feeding a family. But it was pretty brutal, certainly, and it was a yeah, sort of a stark reminder as to the extent of the harshness and the brutality that nature can have. I'll never forget it. I had a completely full vehicle, and I had one vegetarian on the vehicle who was none too impressed with this and actually wanted to leave the sighting when we realised what was actually sort of going down. And it was an interesting one for me, having just sort of started as being a guide, and all guides will tell you that yes, animal knowledge and experience is important, but you also have to be good with people. You have to manage your guests. You have to deal with conflicting wants in terms of what they want to see and opinions. And yes, we had one guest who wanted to leave the area and a bunch who didn't. So I had to rather diplomatically inform them that unfortunately we were going to stay, but they were welcome to look in the other direction and put their fingers in their ears, and we'd tell them when the worst of it was over. Um, but yeah, pretty amazing thing to be a part of. I think a lot of people come on safari with the hope of seeing something like that, and in my experience now, the majority, if they're lucky enough to see something like that, um, come away with it with a very different feeling than they thought they were going to have. It's all very well thinking that that's going to be exciting to watch, but you do put yourself in the position of the prey animal, and it can be quite uncomfortable. Staying out in the sands very late one evening. We didn't. I think we were supposed to be back from the drive at about 7 o'clock, and we were watching lions hunting buffalo again. And we radioed the lodge, said that we were not coming back. We were staying out. And I think about 2 hours later, we finally did get to see a hunt, and we had lions on the back of a buffalo that was calling in distress. And at that point, the guests said they'd seen enough and they wanted to leave because they were uncomfortable watching it. So it's one thing to be a part of it; it's quite another to witness it. Would be interesting to hear from any of you if you've ever been out on safari and witnessed such a thing, to hear your emotions as well. So everybody reacts differently to those things, but it's say very different watching, say, a leopard silently take out an impala or a steenbok or something small than it is to witness the demise of a larger or more vocal animal. I think the majority of us do feel a lot more compassion than we may have thought we would feel in that situation. There's that sort of animalistic instinct to think, what if it was you, I suppose? And it's surprisingly shocking. And it still is. I've been lucky enough to see quite a few, in inverted commas, kills over the years. And it never gets any easier to watch, certainly. You always feel some sympathy. You have to balance those emotions according to what you're seeing, but very humbling to be a part of, certainly. It's the same as seeing an animal in distress, seeing an animal with a broken leg or a horrible injury. It's a difficult to describe experience. Lovely to see all these elephants clustered around the dam like this, and particularly enjoying this one in the middle who's taken up residence absolute central to it and having a lovely swim there, being joined by a second one. Spectacular views. I see we've got a couple of people sharing their experiences. So look, Catherine, your first kill was hyenas eating a wildebeest right next to the car. It took 15 minutes for the wildebeest to succumb, and you'll never forget it. Very hard to watch. Yeah, it is, particularly with hyenas. They don't do any of this choke around the throat nonsense and cut off the blood supply with those jaws. They just get stuck in there, and it must be a pretty horrific way to go. The only consoling thing I can tell you is that we believe at least that the experience is so traumatic, if that's the right word, that the amount of adrenaline pumping through that animal and the shock that it goes into, we can at least hope that they don't sort of really feel that much. But that may be a little bit of wishful thinking. Leopard lover, you saw an elephant annihilate an aloe tree, but nothing carnivorous. Well, I'm sure that wasn't quite so bad, but who knows? Maybe trees feel more than we think next time we break off a branch. Give that a little bit of extra thought. You saw a lion with a broken leg in Pilansberg. Oh. Yeah, that's very, very harsh when you see an animal, even when you see an impala that's sort of really struggling. I've seen a couple of impalas with broken legs, and you see that leg sort of flopping around, and it looks horrible. And there's nothing that you could do for that animal, even if we were to get involved, there is only one thing we could do, which is the most extreme measure, and may often be seen as the most kind. But as many of you know, the policies will differ between different reserves as to what to do with an animal in distress. But more often than not, if in doubt, it's natural problem, natural answer, man-made problem, man-made answer. Busy bee, you've had the misfortune to witness your own domestic cats taking out some garden birds. Well, yes, that does happen, unfortunately. Um, they wear a bell, but every now and again, Velma, hello Velma, to your cat, succeeds. Well, that's what they're very good at, Velma. I've also, I know my parents have got a cat, and it often delivers entrails and occasionally the head of a mouse that is found on the carpet or in the kitchen occasionally. You can't quell that instinct, unfortunately. But considering the amount of time that I have spent out in the bush, I have not seen that many actual physical kills happen in front of me. I've seen many animals feeding upon other animals, but to actually witness the moment of the kill itself, from my experience at least, is rather rare. There's a lot of good fortune. I've seen many, many failed hunts. Remember that these sort of documentary programs, they tend to give the impression that every time a lion so much as looks at an animal, it's going to catch it. But their success rate out in the wild is not as good as it's often made out to be. Most of these predators are not operating at much more than about 15 to 20% success rate in terms of hunts. Even things like wild dogs, which are supposed to have the highest success rate, they say sort of 80, 90% of things that they chase. I've seen many failed wild dog hunts as well. So sometimes you wait for hours for something to happen and nothing does, or it's failed, and other times it just happens when you're least expecting. They're in the sands once, and I'd gone to pick up some guests from the airstrip, and we had about a 15-minute drive back to the lodge. And we'd stopped and we were enjoying a little daker who was standing next to the road feeding, and then out of nowhere was a flash of yellow and black, and a leopard took it out right in front of the car on the road about 5 meters in front of us. So you just never know what you're going to see. That was quite the um, well, baptism of fire for those first time safari goers. I'm sure that's something they'll never forget. Speaking of other hunters, leopard lover is asking, or mentioning that owls have this silent flight, and do other birds of prey have this? No. Leopard lover, the silent flight in owls is pretty much unique to that group of birds. It all comes down to the way that their feather structure is put together. The leading edge of an owl's feathers is quite fluffy as opposed to quite rigid like many other birds, particularly those larger eagles. They need a very, very strong aerofoil shape to create enough lift for what is a relatively heavy bird, and to give it the maneuverability and to be able to change direction at high speeds. You need to have a very, very strong wing in order to take those stresses of flight. An owl hunts very differently, mostly through hearing. It'll pinpoint the sound with its specialized ears, and then swoop down to take whatever it is off the ground by surprise. All those zebras having a run. Very cool to see. So the way that they're leading edge, those feathers, they don't zip together like you often see in feathers. It's fluffy, so that when the air sort of separates around that leading edge of the wing, some goes above it, some goes below it. The air speeds are different. That's what creates the lift. And this is a much more subtle arrangement in owls because if you hunt by hearing, then you don't want to make a lot of noise yourself. If you're hunting at night and trying to take things by surprise, you also don't want to give your approach away when swooping down to grab a little mouse or whatever it is, because it's more likely to move out of the way. Nice now that some of the sort of chaos has subsided, you can almost see the different elephant groups splitting up. We've got a group moving away from the waterhole and a teenager at the back who is enjoying himself sort of rather reluctantly following the rest of the group, another group heading off in the distance, this group on the right hand side. So interesting to see the different dynamics. They all came together. There was no great concern, not a great amount of competition, thankfully. Possibly those two herds are related, but it could be little sort of family groups within the herd catching each other up there. But they'll all follow those same trails, despite the fact they could go in any direction. There'll be very established trails there that the animals will take as if, um, what's that, by clockwork, but you know what I mean. There's elephant trails that have been trodden for millennia, are just the pathways that are emblazoned into their minds, a road map of the area. Interesting to see that we had that sort of great amount of elephants around the waterhole now. They all seem to be drifting away, with the exception of this one little group, and you can see now how everything else is coming back in. Time for sharing, but interesting that all the elephants seem to come down at once. So whether or not it was one very large herd um, that has sort of met up and has now moved off, or if it was separate herds that all agreed to have a meeting at this waterhole at this particular time. All the things that we do not know. But look at all these antelopes now streaming in to take advantage of the space that's been left behind. Antelopes and zebras. It's nice to see such large groups of animals. Say, out in the low veld where I've spent most of my career, we have a great diversity of mammalian life particularly in terms of antelopes. But generally speaking, with the exception of buffalo, you don't get very big herds of things. If you do see zebras, they're those little harem groups, maybe sort of 6 or 7 at a time. Very rare that you see very large herds, just because of the type of vegetation there. It's a very mixed and diverse vegetation, a lot of grass, a lot of trees, a lot of shrubs, which can't support massive groups. And then if you go up to East Africa or the more open areas here, like West Africa, or the western side of southern Africa, you do suddenly start seeing potentially less diversity because there is less of a choice of food that will suit a huge number of different species, but greater numbers of those individuals. This little elephant almost looks as if he's eyeing up all those zebras having a drink across the pond. Urban Junior asking if crocodiles can die from old age. Um, I see no reason why not. Old age in a crocodile can be up to 100 years. They are very, very long-lived creatures. And so out in the wild, generally speaking, very few things die of old age because as they get older, they get easier to catch, they lose condition, more susceptible to disease. Crocodiles might be an exception, though. I would actually have to do a little bit of checking up on that for you. I'm not 100% sure, but crocodiles don't really have much in the way of predators. Um, and I'm not really sure of the eventual demise of crocodiles. There are certainly diseases and things that can get hold of crocodiles. Um, but yeah, I'm not really sure. It's not something you see very often, actually. I don't ever remember seeing sort of a dead crocodile. Obviously, anything that does die is usually hoovered up pretty quickly by all the scavengers. But good question, Evan Jr. I will have to check. Yeah, that's a good question. So I suppose it depends very much what you consider old age. If old age is just you getting to, or your organs no longer able to function, there is this idea that all hearts sort of beat the same number of times for any animal, give or take. So why smaller animals with a faster metabolism and heart rates have a shorter lifespan, bigger animals with much slower heart rates live for longer. And there is this idea that pretty much all organisms' hearts, regardless of their size, have a sort of a quota of the number of beats before they start running out. But yeah, I suppose it depends what you consider to be old age. I mean, elephants themselves get old, but they in captivity will last longer than out in the wild because it's their teeth that normally spells the end of them. If they don't succumb to disease, it's ultimately sort of malnutrition that begins to take hold because they're unable to grind their food properly and extract enough nutrition to run those big bodies. So I suppose it depends on what you consider dying of old age to be. It's just your organs degrading with age and beginning to run out of steam. Then I imagine that does happen to crocodiles. I can't see what else it would be. I don't think they get to 100 years and just the lights suddenly switch off. Been asked where's the best place in Africa to go stargazing? Well, in southern Africa, uh, ultimately you want to go somewhere where it's dry and very little humidity. So this would be a good option out here in Namibia, somewhere like the Namib Reserve or the Namib Narcluft Reserve, which is an acclaimed international dark sky reserve according to Dark Sky International. Um, that's one of the best places on the planet to go because not only is it incredibly dark with zero light pollution, sitting at portal 1 on the light pollution index, but because it's very, very dry as well, that's not much humidity. And from a clarity perspective, and particularly from a photographic perspective, you want to go somewhere with little humidity because humidity, by definition, is water vapor in the air. And when you're trying off objects that far away that are already coming through the atmosphere as is, any imperfections in that atmosphere, any little droplets of water vapor are going to refract that light and potentially cause distortions in photographs. And you can see the difference if you do it for a long time between stargazing in a humid area and a very dry area, even to the naked eye. It's difficult to explain, but the sky just looks clearer. There is a better clarity to the sky. So if you can get over to the western side of the southwestern side of the continent, anywhere around Namibia is excellent. In South Africa itself, your best bet is the Karoo. It's very, very well known as a stargazing hotspot. Those areas around Sutherland, around Carnarvon, anywhere in the Karoo, because again, it's generally speaking, clear conditions a lot of the year, very, very dry conditions, and cold. Cold is good because cold air does not hold much moisture for the reasons we just discussed. And that's why there are some research grade telescopes. You've got the Meerkat telescope array around Carnarvon, the very famous SALT, the South African Large Telescope, is in Sutherland, the largest single mirror telescope in the Southern Hemisphere. Um, so yeah, those are your best bets to my knowledge, certainly. Go to the Karoo or head further west into Namibia, into the Namibian desert. Just take enough water with you. Catherine, you're also suggesting the salt pans in Botswana. Yes, that would be an amazing place to go as well. A little bit more humidity up there, but very, very dark. And certainly if you get to any of those areas where there's a very sort of still thin layer of water somewhere, from a photographic perspective, that can be amazing because you get the reflections of all of the stars mirrored in the ground. It makes for some lovely photographic opportunities. But one thing I've learned about astrophotography over the years is that you need some foreground objects to make it interesting. Otherwise, you're just taking pictures of the stars in the Milky Way, which, yes, is beautiful, but a picture or a photograph needs more elements to be attractive to the naked eye. So a nice dead tree or a rusty car or an animal or a person, you've got to have something in the foreground to draw the eye's attention to contrast the beauty of the night sky. So that's often the hardest part to get your composition. This would be a lovely photograph here. You'd have that lovely tree on the left, put that on the left-hand side of the screen using that classic rule of thirds photographic rule. And then you've got the dam in the center, which would create a nice reflection of the stars. So yeah, all about composition. Someone also suggesting Antarctica. Never been, would love to go and have a look. Might be quite cold. But yes, zero light pollution down there, but somewhat inclement weather around the South Pole. But there are also telescopes in Antarctica for that reason as well. Thin ozone down there as well. Remember, that's why we have things like Hubble and James Webb up above the atmosphere to avoid any of that refraction of light as it has to pass through the atmosphere, regardless of how much water vapor is there. There will always be some distortion. So if you can put a telescope outside the atmosphere, those are clear views. Duranda in my ear is saying he's been up to Drakensberg, 1,000 meters plus in height, and would that be a good option? Yeah, absolutely. If you can get high and you can get somewhere cold and dark, then that is anywhere you can go. I mean, to be honest, we're arguing over little things, unless you're doing it at a seriously high level, it's not going to make it a huge difference. To take nice sort of Milky Way panoramas, it doesn't make a huge difference because you're not taking massively long exposures. Once you get into some more deep space astrophotography and you're starting to photograph nebulae and star clusters and those giant clouds of gas, which are hundreds or millions of light years away, then it starts to make a difference when you're accumulating lots and lots of data, hours and hours of photographs and needing to process them. Um, but today's cameras are so good that you can get some pretty spectacular shots as long as it's relatively dark. Just light pollution is a problem, but even then you can get filters which will combat a lot of the light pollution. Some can be removed in post-processing, but there is no substitute to going to nice dark, clear skies. Someone also asking about double exposure editing if you are going to take a foreground for a nighttime shot. Again, that's rather up to you. Some people would suggest that that's a less pure way of doing it. I mean, you can do composite images. It's quite possible to take this image in broad daylight and then take one at nighttime and then balance the two colors with some sort of clever masking and editing on software such as Photoshop or similar. But it's always nicer to do it as one shot if you can. So yes, you would have to do double exposure editing, really. So you'd take a long exposure for the sky, and then if it's very dark, you'd potentially have to take an even longer exposure for the foreground, because the foreground doesn't move. If you've got a star tracker, which is tracking the movement of the stars across the sky as the Earth turns, then you can take 3 5-minute exposures if needs be. But otherwise, anything more than about 20 30 seconds, depending on your camera sensor and the type of lens that you're moving, you're going to end up with wobbly lines or straight lines instead of pinprick stars, which you want to try and avoid, unless you're doing a star trail. But the foreground doesn't move, so as long as your tripod stays still, you can set your camera exposure to 2 or 3 minutes at a relatively low ISO and just allow the camera sensor to pick out that foreground detail. But yes, you are going to be doing blending then the two exposures and post-processing with sort of layers and things like that. But that was a little nice digression of topic. Let's enjoy the wildlife for a little bit. And it seems all our elephants and big herds of zebras have migrated away during my little astrophotographic rant, although it was answering questions, so I feel slightly better than that about that. But let's head up to town in Madikwe, see what's going on there. Ah, beautiful waterbuck bull. Very nice. Don't see those too often out in the open like this. His characteristic white ring around his bottom. Beautiful to see a nice male waterbuck like this. We don't see we do see them quite regularly out in the bush, but not often you get to see them out in the open like that. Those beautiful, great big spiraling horns, or ridged horns at least. They are territorial, these bulls. This is a lovely territory for him to look after here with all this permanent water, if this is the dominant male of the area. Just not a lot of foodstuffs, because they also predominantly eat grass. They have to travel a little bit further afield away from the water to find food. It seems our waterbuck has disappeared now, but say the ever-present herd of wildebeest in the background and some nice little water birds. I see a spur-winged goose, some red-billed teals, and what looks, at least from this distance, to be a spoonbill on the right-hand side there, and a greyhound. Oh, wow, look at that, and a beautiful male kudu. Now that is unusual to see out in the open like this. Normally very much prefer to spend their time in the thick stuff, but all animals have to come and have a drink, and that's lovely to see. The most magnificent of all the antelope species that we have out in southern Africa. Now, that is not something you see every day, a kudu having a drink in an open patch like this. And a younger one joining him as well. They often do associate in bachelor herds, but you're just as likely to find one solitary individual. You see him having a little bit of a hack around in the mud with his horns there. And another one. Wow, this is very special. Two fully grown kudus and then one who looks about 3 or 4 years of age. So it is a bit of a, again, rule of thumb. But those twists of a kudu's horn, 2.5 full twists for an adult. Ah, here comes a female. Generally speaking, it takes about a year for half a twist. So for 2.5 twists, that's about 5 years of age, which would mean full maturity for a bull. That's one way you can sort of guesstimate the age of a kudu. A little bit unusual to see two big males and a group of females together because they are not territorial animals. They're not like zebras either with a harem. Generally speaking, if there are males here, in fact, I think we're seeing evidence of it, or we're about to there. If there are males associating with the females, that's because one of these females is potentially coming into estrus. Otherwise, generally speaking, the two sexes don't mix very often at all. In kudus, like many antelope species, the females will come into heat, into season, into estrus for around about 5 to 7 days, I believe. But generally speaking, they will almost always only actually follow through and copulate on the last day of their cycle. And it's thought that that is an evolutionary adaptation to combat exactly what we're potentially seeing here, where multiple males are attracted to the smells that that female is given off, saying that she is potentially ready to mate. And if she only actually mates on the last day, that gives all of these males time to fight it out amongst themselves, meaning that by the time she does mate, it should be the biggest and strongest kudu bull who is still the one left standing and still attempting to be her suitor, and therefore the best chances of the best quality genetics getting passed on. It's very, very nice to see. I just love the beards of those males that hang down underneath the neck. Don't think I've ever seen one that was sort of matted or not in good condition. It's almost as if they have a secret kudu beard comb that they have, and it always looks perfect. And see this man digging around in the mud with his horns. It's a behavior that is sometimes known as mud caking. It's a little bit of showing off to the females. You can see him having a little check there of her reproductive status. So maybe a little bit of some visual displays. There's also this idea that dominant males will do that so that once they get the mud on their horns, that mud dries and just makes the horns look a little bit bigger from a dominance perspective to other males and potentially more be more attractive to the females. We see that in quite a few antelope species. It's one of the theories. You see, this male is a little bit stockier than the one that we just saw. Often this time, Vero, if a male is interested, his neck will also swell up, and you can see a male in his, if you like, his breeding plumage has a rather swollen looking neck. And again, that's an adaptation. Potentially it's fat deposits, but a good strong neck means that you're more likely to win an exchange. If horns are locked against another male, you need to have a strong neck in order to potentially wrestle your opponent. And again, it's a visual sign that you're in very good condition. Sarah, you're asking which antelope horns grow the longest. There's our crocodile. Well, it's not him. I would imagine it probably is the kudu, or if not the kudu, it'll be very much up there. But you imagine if you straighten out the kudu's horns because of all those twists, they can be exceptionally long. Um, there are cases where I believe if you sort of stretch them all out, they would get as long as about 3 meters, which is ridiculous. So good thing that they curve, otherwise they'd be bumping into pretty much everything. Um, I'm just trying to think if there's anything bigger. I mean, Eland is the largest antelope we have here, but generally speaking, they don't have particularly long horns. They're very, very thick and stocky. Um, yeah, sables have a very large horn, which we saw down at Founders a little while ago, the way they sweep back over their head. The Gemsbok or the Oryx also long horns, but I don't think any of them are going to get to the length as if you straightened out a kudu's horn. Whether there are any other antelopes in different regions of Africa that would surpass that, I'm not sure, but that would be my gut feel, is it probably is a kudu if you straightened the horn out. Lovely to see our crocodile again. This crocodile at Tower is becoming quite the celebrity. It's got a lot of airtime. I don't know if anybody's named him. We probably shouldn't, but I've seen him so often now, I'm beginning to feel quite attached to this crocodile. And of course, he gave us an utterly amazing sighting last month when we saw him eating a snake, assuming it is the same one, of course. Joanne Mello, you're enjoying the croc sighting? Yeah, lovely to see him again. Him or her, without flipping him over and having a bit of a prod around, it's very difficult to tell. Uh, and I'm not willing to do that, unfortunately. Well, Luanda has left us in my ear. He's been replaced by Tulu. So everybody say hi to Tulu, who is going to be helping us for the last 40 minutes or so of the show. And I believe that quite a few of those astrophotography questions were actually coming from Luanda. So I hope I have helped you out with some ideas there. And good luck if you're getting into that sort of discipline. It's very, very frustrating. But this is a good time to do it in South Africa with the much more stable weather conditions. That nice high pressure cell over the interior of the country means that, theoretically at least, it should be clear skies almost every night. Only other best advice I can give you is keep an eye on the moon phase. It's getting brighter all the time at the moment, and it's not the best time to do it when the moon is bright because it washes out the sky a little bit. You want to aim for new moon or that period after full moon. Remember, the moon rises later every night. So at full moon, it'll rise the same time as the sun sets, but every night it'll rise, well, it changes, but on average, somewhere between sort of half an hour and 45 minutes later every day. So you can still get a nice couple of hours in because the sunset is quite early in South Africa in winter. Even 3 or 4 days after full moon, you'll still get a couple of hours of nice dark skies. Someone suggesting we should, or Leopard Lover, you're suggesting we should call the crocodile Ben. I don't know if that's flattering or not, to be honest. But I suppose a good a name as any. So another little herd of blue wildebeest there. You can see it doesn't look as if they're eating much, but you can see there's a little um, smattering of grass there, and that is the wildebeest's favourite food. They love that freshly sprouted grass. That is the most nutritional part. And as we said yesterday, wildebeest are quite picky. They will refuse to eat anything higher than about 30 centimeters. It becomes too fibrous for them, and they'll turn their nose up at it. So this is perfect for them. There's little shoots that are just coming through the ground at the moment. Look like the territorial bull coming in from the left there looks a little bit bigger than the rest. There is a definite size difference between the cows and the bulls. He will be the dominant bull of this area, not necessarily this group, a little bit like the impalas where we were talking about earlier when it is their territorial season. A wildebeest will hold the territory often throughout the year and defend that territory and hope that a group of females will be attracted to his territory, and when they are, he will try and keep them there and have mating opportunities. But they will often migrate in between different males' territories. So males territorial, females have what we call a home range, which will encompass multiple male territories. And males will scrap over those territories, make sure that he can hold them for as long as possible, and therefore, generally speaking, the biggest, most dominant, strongest, most confident bull will hold the best territory. And it is therefore more likely that a herd will end up in his area because it will have the best access to water, the best food, the best shelter, allowing his genetics to be passed on. Yeah, the Kenyan suggesting the crocodile should be called Tommy Tao. Oh, that's a nice alliterative name. Tommy Tao. But call him the crocodile. Found himself a nice gooey patch of mud there to lie on, but it was cold-blooded. Warm up in the sun, like those little ridges on the back, those little ossicles, which have got good blood vessel action running through them. We'll let them warm up in the sun and circulate through that very, very thick skin that acts as a good insulator. We should often see crocodiles lying with their mouths open. A lot of people think that that's them warming up. It's actually more the opposite. It's them trying to lose a little bit of heat if it's too hot, as a general rule. Sort of, if you like, sweating through that tongue. I think they're quite happy just to absorb heat through their body in a situation like this. But if they do get too hot, opening the mouth, letting the wind go across the membranous surface of the sun, rather like panting, I suppose, is a good way to get rid of any excess heat. Although you'd think you'd rather just get in the water. But it seems that that's what they do. And there is another theory where if they do sit facing the sun with their mouth open, that they're actually um, cooking any bacteria that may be forming sort of in their teeth. Obviously, they do eat a fairly unpleasant diet of decaying meat, lots and lots of bacteria there. Their stomach is able to deal with any of that. One of the most acidic stomachs in the natural world, thanks to that ability to siphon excess carbon dioxide into the stomach, which helps with the creation of digested juices. Very, very high pH level. But say one theory is that they try and cook that bacteria to get rid of any additional stuff stuck in their teeth. I suppose good way to control tooth decay. And Penny, most reptiles will control their temperature in this way. It's the cold-blooded animals, those ectothermic animals, they are unable to control their body temperature, so they're reliant on external stimuli to do so. So you'll find most lizards, snakes will often lie in the sun to warm up. I don't know of any that will necessarily cool down in the same way. I mean, we see birds doing it. Birds do what's called gular flapping, where they'll sit there on a hot day with their beaks open and sort of their tongue flexing, just forcing air currents across their tongue so they can lose a bit of heat in evaporative cooling. But pretty much all reptiles will spend their time between the shade and the sun to try and control that body temperature using external stimuli. Nice to see all these little damselflies and dragonflies landing on the crocodile as well. Looks like a scarlet dropwing or something similar. There are lots of very similar looking red orthopterans. Orthoptera, is that right? No, Odonata is the family for dragonflies and damselflies. Sorry, Orthoptera is grasshoppers and crickets and those sorts of things. There's definitely a dragonfly that's just landed on his back there, lying with the wings outstretched. Damselflies and dragonflies and drop wings, all slightly different things, but classic dragonflies will lie with their wings open and apart like that, spread out across their backs. The damselflies and the drop wings will have their wings folded up longitudinally along the top of their body. Yeah, it'd be very nice to have some close-up views of this crocodile. I thought he had a bit of blood on the top of his head for a minute, but that's one of those little drop wings sitting up there, very vivid red colour. But I think we're going to head over to Tembe Elephant Park again and see what is happening over there. Beautiful big tusked elephant here. Still looks quite young actually to have tusks of that size. Looking at his general body size, looks like he's got a bit of growing to do, but a very impressive set of tusks. And if my eyes don't deceive me, it looks like we may have another waterbuck lying in the grass just to the right of the dam there. Waterbuck Day. Waterbuck and kudus. Kudus for me has been the highlight so far. Not often you get to see them out in the open like that. That tusk proving to be the perfect opportunity to drape one's trunk across it. Take some of that great weight off. Vicky, you're asking which of the Africam locations has the largest elephant population. Um, Difficult to say in terms of specific areas because a lot of these are sort of smaller reserves. Tempe Elephant Park is not an enormous area if you compare it to something like Kruger. In general, which country in Africa has the biggest population of elephants? Well, that is Botswana, with somewhere around about 130,000, I think, last I heard, of elephants roaming the countryside there. Zimbabwe also has a lot, somewhere up in the low hundred thousands. I think South Africa is around about sort of 25 to 30,000 wild elephants, the majority of which are going to be found within the Kruger National Park and the surrounding reserves, that Transfrontier Park. But in terms of the actual locations, difficult to say because elephants are not territorial animals. So if it's an open system, like up in Kruger, we have cam cameras in Juma, we have cameras in Olifants West and other areas of it. So there'll be seasonal changes depending on availability of resources. Those elephants will traverse great distances if they have to. They're hard to give you a specific answer on that, but in terms of what country has the most elephants, that's definitely Botswana. I had to do a little bit of a check there, but Tempe Elephant Park is around about 30,000 hectares, so still a pretty large area. Um, and from what I've seen, I think their population of elephants is just under about 300, so not that many. Um, but remember, elephants can do an awful lot of damage, and you don't want too many elephants in one place, otherwise they can cause a complete change in the environment and make it unsuitable for a whole host of other animals, and ultimately um, sort of destroy it for themselves. So it's all part of reserve management. I always say if you're gonna, it doesn't matter how big your reserve is, whether it's the size of a football pitch or the size of a country, the second you put a fence around it and cut off any natural migration routes that those animals would have otherwise had, it does become our responsibility to manage population numbers there, to ensure the best chance of survival for the greatest number of species, a good species diversity. I do believe that if we left things alone, nature would find its balance, but that will take some time and there would be very much some hardships whilst nature figured it out. It's not a click of the fingers solution by any stretch. So the second we start meddling with things and changing the natural order, we have to some extent, get in there and manage it to ensure that we haven't upset the apple cart too greatly, too quickly. Nature takes time. It's incredibly adaptive. It's been doing it for a lot longer than we have, but we are forcing nature to do it on a far quicker time scale than it's capable. He does have a very impressive set of tusks. Again, hard to say for sure, but I wouldn't have put him more than in his mid-20s. And those tusks theoretically will continue to grow as he does, so he's got a very good chance of turning into a very impressive tusker in his latter years. Nice symmetry as well, nice wide spread on them. And nice to see another waterbuck in the background as well. Stephanie Clunefault, I hope I have pronounced that correctly. I'm glad you've enjoyed the show and that it's made your meeting tolerable. I don't know why you're watching this show when you're in a meeting, but I'm glad you've enjoyed it. We've had some lovely sights again today. I enjoyed all of those elephants around at Okuyu, certainly, but for me, yeah, definite highlight was seeing those kudus coming down for a drink, seeing those two big bulls, magnificent horns, and nice to see a couple of waterbuck. We don't get to see those very often, and a bushbuck, that we saw here at Tenby right at the beginning. Us also commenting on those tusks. They are pretty spectacular. So I've seen some beautiful ones in my time. I saw a lovely big tusked elephant down in the southern part of Kruger, not that far from Birkendal in those areas a couple of years ago, which I wasn't expecting to see. It's not an area of the park where you expect to see really impressively tusked elephants. Normally, the further north you go, the better your chances of spotting some really big ones. But nice to know that they are scattered around the park. Interesting, this heron is still hanging around there. He was the one who seemed almost annoyed that that elephant was using that little waterhole earlier. I wonder if he's got designs on all of the little arthropods that have been uprooted by elephants tusking around in there. but not something you'd normally expect to see. Herons hanging around little spots like this. He's having a very relaxing afternoon, this elephant. Hardly moved a muscle since we've seen him. You'd think he'd be standing in the shade, but it's not oppressively hot at the moment in South Africa. High 20s, a very pleasant temperature actually, and just taking the opportunity to not do much, to be honest. Just enjoy a little bit of warmth. Everything he needs right there. Just letting the brain relax for a little bit, saving some energy. Rather mesmeric to watch, actually. She's got this little sort of gentle rocking motion going on. We do know elephants sleep standing up, sometimes leaning up against a tree. I would say fairly unusual to see one if he is having a little snooze, completely out in the open like this. But as good a time as any for a little siesta, I suppose. Maybe he was having a little sleep. Looks like he was just woken up, had a bit of a stretch. I suppose that's the elephant equivalent of splashing some water on his face, a little bit of dust in the mouth. I say go back to sleep, buddy. That's often the best sleep you have. When you wake up in the morning and realise you haven't got to get up for work, you can roll over and go back and grab another half an hour, 45 minutes. I often find that's the most satisfying sleep that you can have in the course of an evening, or morning in this case. Archie, what you're asking, what's the biggest pair of tusks I've seen on an elephant? Well, it's difficult to put a figure on it because not normally in a position where I can get out and measure them. But off the top of my head, one of the biggest ones that I can remember is that one that I saw in the south of Kruger. It was a few years ago now, but quite close to Gardenia Hyde, if I remember correctly. Um, and I would say probably double the length of this one, or at least these tusks and a half again. Very thick as well. But he was a big old bull, certainly. But I was never fortunate, or I'm yet to see any of those claimed big tuskers themselves. I can't think of any other that I've seen. I mean, say spending some time in Tanzania, there were some big tuskers up there, but I can't off the top of my head remember a moment where I saw one and thought, "Wow, that is a seriously impressive set." The only one that springs to mind is that one in Southern Kruger. I did see another very impressive animal on the road on the road from Punda Maria Gate when I was up in Kruger a few years ago. I'd say there are some pretty impressive animals the further north you go at the right time of year in Kruger. But it is always amazing to see, and you have a great amount of respect and humility when you see one of those things, especially when it's quite close to the car. I think we're definitely waking up, doing some morning ablutions, tentative dust bath. This was that impala come flying out from behind the bushes and a rogue swish of a trunk, just clearing a path for himself as this youngster makes his way through. Let's see if there's any interaction between these two if they come together, and whether or not this waterbuck is comfortable enough to hold his ground. Catherine, you're saying you saw a very big pair of tusks on a one ton, but that was 20 years ago or so. Oh no, the waterbuck's thought better of it. But yeah, every now and again you come across one, and it's very special when you do see one of those big tusked elephants. Certainly, there's waterbuck thinking, yeah, I'll stand over here. Interesting to see if we get a little greeting ritual, some trunk touching between these two if they do come to visit one another. They're definitely a younger, smaller bull, this one. Oh, the youngster's definitely coming to say hello. But these elephants will all know each other pretty well, I'm sure. Yeah, very little recognition from this larger one of the other one's presence at all. Somewhat aloof. I almost feel like the other one came over to say hi and got ignored. Try his luck this side round. See him using his feet just to help chop the grass down there. John Mellow, Leopard Lover, I'm glad you've enjoyed it. We are getting to that time, only a few minutes left again. But I'm glad you've enjoyed watching the show. We've, again, always seen some wonderful sights, beautiful elephants, beautiful kudus, lovely water bucks, some interesting interactions, great views of our crocodile. Always very, very special. And Ginny B, how lovely to see these grand gentlemen of the bush. It's a nice way of putting it. They are very much the gentlemen of the bush. They should be prancing around in top hats and tails, I feel sometimes. Very distinguished. Classy animals as well. You can learn a lot from their interactions. Role models for all of us. Tattered ears this young bull has got. He's been marauding through some vegetation in his younger life, I think. Lost a bit of that lovely thin skin. Beautiful features. Okay, well, we are down to the last minute or so. So, to all of you who joined us, thanks very much. It's been very special for me to spend the last 5 days, hopefully being a translator of nature, offering some opinions and insights to what we've been seeing. Great as always to get all of your questions, give me lots of things to think about, and go and do some research on. I will be handing over to somebody else from tomorrow. But I will be back again next month and have the opportunity to see some of these wonderful sights. But enjoy the rest of your days, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. And I hope you continue to enjoy all of these great pictures and great feeds and information that we're able to give you. Leave you with a parting shot of these two elephants enjoying themselves at Tembe Elephant Park.